Jack's life had become a series of long, quiet roads and endless nights under dim stars. For 3 years, he'd called an old, beat-up camper his home. The camper wasn't much to look at. Its paint was faded, its tires were worn thin, and the interior smelled faintly of oil and rust, but it was all Jack had left. Once upon a time, things had been different. He'd owned a house with a white picket fence, worked as a mechanic in a bustling garage, and dreamed of building something meaningful. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest threads, and for Jack, everything fell apart piece by piece. It started with the divorce, a messy, bitter split that drained him emotionally and financially. Then came the mounting debts, the late-night phone calls from creditors, and the eventual loss of his job when the garage went out of business. By the time he realized how far he'd fallen, there was no one left to catch him. His friends drifted away, embarrassed by his misfortune, and his family stopped answering his calls. Alone and ashamed, Jack packed what little he could fit into the camper and hit the road, leaving behind the life he once knew. The open highway became both his refuge and his prison. On one hand, it gave him freedom, the ability to move without being tied down to a place or a person. On the other hand, it isolated him further, forcing him to confront the silence within himself. He spent most days fixing cars for strangers in exchange for cash or food, enough to keep the camper running and his stomach full. Nights were harder. When the world grew still, memories crept in like shadows, whispering reminders of everything he'd lost. To drown them out, Jack would tinker with the camper's engine or stare at the stars until sleep finally claimed him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack found himself driving through a stretch of desolate highway, surrounded by dense woods. The air was thick with humidity, and dark clouds gathered overhead, hinting at an impending storm. He turned on the radio, searching for anything to fill the silence, but static was all he could find. Sighing, he reached over to turn it off, and that's when he saw her. At first, she was just a blur in the distance, a pale figure standing awkwardly by the side of the road. As Jack approached, his headlights illuminated her fully, and his breath caught in his throat. She was young, probably in her early 20s, and wore a wedding dress that looked like it had seen better days. The fabric was dirty, torn in places, and clung damply to her skin from the light drizzle that had begun to fall. Her feet were bare, caked with mud, and her face was streaked with tears and smudged makeup. Yet despite her disheveled appearance, there was something striking about her, an intensity in her eyes that spoke of pain, defiance, and desperation. Jack slowed the camper to a stop a few feet ahead of her. He hesitated, debating whether to intervene. Picking up hitchhikers wasn't exactly safe, especially not ones who looked so broken. But something about her pulled at him, a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Rolling down the window, he leaned out slightly and called out, "You okay?" The girl didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood frozen, staring at him as if trying to decide whether he posed a threat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she took a hesitant step forward. "I need a ride," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of raindrops hitting the pavement. It wasn't a question, it was a plea. Jack frowned, glancing around. There were no houses or rest stops nearby, just miles of empty road, flanked by towering trees. Whoever she was, wherever she was going, she wouldn't last long out here alone. Against his better judgment, he nodded toward the passenger seat. "Get in." She hesitated again before walking around to the other side of the camper and climbing in. Up close, Jack could see the toll her ordeal had taken on her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her dress, and her lips quivered as though she were holding back sobs. Still, there was a spark of determination in her gaze, a refusal to let whatever demons chased her win. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Jack kept his eyes on the road while the girl stared out the window, watching the rain blur the landscape into streaks of gray and green. The tension between them was palpable, heavy with unspoken questions. Who was this girl? Why was she wearing a wedding dress? And why had she been standing alone in the middle of nowhere? Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Jack cleared his throat. "What's your name?" he asked gruffly, keeping his tone neutral. Emily, she replied softly, still looking out the window. And where are you headed, Emily? She hesitated, then shrugged. Anywhere but here. Jack raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Everyone had their reasons for running, and he knew better than to pry too deeply. Besides, he had his own secrets, his own scars he preferred to keep hidden. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, letting the rhythmic hum of the engine fill the space between them. As the storm intensified, rain pounding against the windshield, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that picking up Emily might change something, for better or worse. Little did he know this chance encounter would set off a chain of events neither of them could have anticipated. The rain continued to pour relentlessly as Jack drove, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers providing a strange sort of comfort. Emily sat silently in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though trying to shield against an invisible storm. Her wet hair clung to her face and droplets of water slid down her cheeks, mingling with the remnants of tears. The camper smelled faintly of damp fabric now, mixing uneasily with the lingering scent of oil and rust. Jack glanced at her occasionally, his curiosity growing stronger with each passing mile. "Where'd you come from?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was gruff but not unkind, and he kept his eyes on the road as he spoke. Emily didn't answer right away. She stared out the window, watching the dark shapes of trees blur together in the rain. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "A wedding?" she said simply, as if that explained everything. Jack frowned slightly. "Yours?" She nodded, her fingers twisting nervously in the fabric of her dress. "Yeah, or it was supposed to be mine." Something about the way she said it made Jack's chest tighten. He had seen enough pain in his own life to recognize it in others, and Emily's story clearly wasn't over yet. Still, he didn't press her. People opened up in their own time, or they didn't open up at all. For the next hour, they drove in relative silence. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and the road ahead seemed endless. Jack occasionally glanced at Emily out of the corner of his eye. She looked lost, like someone who had been pushed into deep waters and was struggling to stay afloat. Her bare feet were tucked under the hem of her dress, and her shoulders slumped forward as though carrying an invisible weight. Finally, after what felt like forever, Emily spoke again. "I ran away," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't go through with it." Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel, unsure of how to respond. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked cautiously. Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really, but maybe. I don't know." She sighed heavily, leaning back against the seat. "It's complicated." Jack nodded slowly. Life usually is. That simple statement seemed to strike a chord with her. After a moment, she began talking, not because Jack pressured her, but because she needed to say it out loud to hear the words herself. What followed was a flood of emotions poured out in halting sentences and broken phrases. "My family owes money to this guy, this rich man who thinks he owns us. He's powerful, connected, and ruthless. When my dad couldn't pay him back, he offered me instead, said I could settle the debt." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. So here I am, dressed like some kind of prize cow, being paraded around for everyone to see. Except I didn't want to be part of his plan. I didn't ask for any of this. Jack listened intently, his jaw tightening as pieces of Emily's story came together. It wasn't hard to imagine the kind of pressure she must have felt, trapped between loyalty to her family and the desire to escape a fate she hadn't chosen. "What happened?" he prompted gently when she paused, her breathing shallow. "I waited until the ceremony started," she continued, her voice steadier now. "There were so many people there, friends, relatives, strangers, all watching me walk down the aisle. Everyone thought it was such a big deal, this grand event. But I felt like I was walking to my own execution. Then, during the vows, when no one was paying attention, I slipped out the back door. Just left. took off running without looking back. Her hands clenched into fists as she spoke, anger bubbling beneath the surface. They'll probably find me eventually. My fiancé, he won't let this go. He'll come after me. And when he does. She trailed off, shaking her head. Jack didn't say anything immediately. He understood fear, knew what it was like to feel hunted, pursued by forces beyond your control. For years, debt collectors had chased him relentlessly, threatening lawsuits and repossession. Even now, living on the road, he sometimes woke up in a cold sweat, convinced they were closing in. But hearing Emily describe her situation brought a fresh wave of empathy. This wasn't just financial ruin, this was personal destruction. "You're safe with me for now," he said finally, his tone firm but reassuring. "I won't turn you in, and I won't leave you stranded. You can stay as long as you need." Emily turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Jack shrugged, his gaze fixed on the road. "Because I've been where you are. Lost, scared, running from something I couldn't face. Maybe I can't fix everything, but I can give you a little breathing room, that's all." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I mean it. Thank you." They drove on in, silence after that, the weight of Emily's confession hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the rain began to ease, leaving behind a misty haze that softened the edges of the world. Jack glanced at the gas gauge and decided they needed to stop soon. They were approaching a small town, its lights glowing faintly in the distance. "We'll pull over here," he said, nodding toward the exit ramp. "Get some food, maybe find a place to park for the night." Emily nodded gratefully. "Okay." As they entered the town, Jack couldn't help but notice how fragile Emily looked. Like a bird caught in a storm, wings battered but still determined to fly. He didn't know what the future held for her or for himself. But one thing was certain. Their paths crossing hadn't been an accident. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, for now. The small town they pulled into was quiet, its streets lined with sleepy storefronts and flickering streetlights. Jack steered the camper toward a nearly empty parking lot, behind a diner that glowed warmly in the damp night air. The sign above, the door read Maggie's Diner, its neon letters buzzing faintly. It wasn't much, but it felt safe. A place where people came to eat greasy food and forget their troubles for a while. "Let's grab something to eat," Jack said, turning off the engine. He glanced at Emily, who had been staring out the window since they arrived. She looked tired, her face pale under the dim light of the dashboard. Her hands were still trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it by folding them neatly in her lap. Emily nodded slowly. "Okay." They stepped out of the camper, the cool mist clinging to their skin. Jack grabbed his worn jacket from the seat and handed it to Emily without a word. She hesitated for a moment before slipping it on, the fabric swallowing her slight frame. It smelled faintly of motor oil and cigarette smoke, but she didn't complain. Instead, she gave him a small, grateful smile. Inside the diner, the warmth hit them like a wave. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper printed with red and white, checkered patterns, and the vinyl booths squeaked softly as patrons shifted in their seats. A jukebox in the corner played a slow country tune, its notes mingling with the clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with curly hair pinned back in a loose bun, greeted them with a cheerful smile. "What, can I get you folks?" she asked, flipping open her notepad. Jack ordered 2 burgers and coffees, keeping things simple. Emily barely glanced at the menu, her attention focused inward as if trying to process everything that had happened. They slid into a booth near the window, where they could see the camper parked outside. Jack watched her carefully, noting how she fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket or traced invisible patterns on the tabletop with her fingertip. "You hungry?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. Emily shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "I guess." Jack leaned back in the booth, studying her profile. There was so much pain hidden behind those guarded eyes, pain that no one should have to carry alone. He wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but words failed him. Instead, He reached across the table and placed a hand lightly over hers. "I know this feels impossible right now," he said gently. "But you're stronger than you think. You made it this far, didn't you?" Emily blinked, surprised by the unexpected kindness. For a moment she just stared at him, searching his face as if trying to decide whether he truly meant what he'd said. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. When the food arrived, Emily picked at her burger half-heartedly, nibbling on the edges rather than taking proper bites. Jack didn't push her to eat more. Instead, he focused on making small talk, sharing stories about his travels and the odd jobs he'd taken along the way. He told her about fixing cars for farmers in rural towns, trading repairs for fresh produce, and sleeping under the stars when the weather was good. His tales were lighthearted, tinged with humor and self-deprecation, and gradually Emily began to relax. By the end of the meal, she was even managing a faint smile. After dinner, they returned to the camper and parked it farther away from the main road, tucked between rows of trees where they wouldn't draw attention. Jack lit a small lantern inside, casting a golden glow over the cramped space. He rummaged through a box of supplies and pulled out a deck of cards, holding it up with a grin. "Ever play poker?" he asked. Emily shook her head, but there was a flicker of interest in her expression. "Not really." "Well, tonight's your lucky night," Jack replied, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. "Lesson 1. Always bluff better than you actually are." They spent the next hour playing silly card games, laughing at their own mistakes and teasing each other good-naturedly. For the first time in days, or maybe even weeks, Emily felt a sense of normalcy. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted her steps since leaving the wedding seemed to fade, if only briefly. And Jack? He hadn't realized how much he'd missed having someone to share moments with, however fleeting they might be. As the night wore on, Emily grew quieter again, her thoughts drifting back to the reality waiting for her beyond the camper's thin walls. Jack noticed the change immediately and decided to broach the subject carefully. "You've got options, you know," he said, leaning against the counter. "You don't have to go back to that life. Whatever happens next is up to you." Emily hugged her knees to her chest, staring at the floor. "But what can I do? I don't have money, a job, or anywhere to go. I'm stuck." Jack sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Listen, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's not gonna be easy. But you're smart, resourceful, and brave enough to walk away from something toxic. That counts for a lot. We'll figure it out together, okay? One step at a time." His words lingered in the air, planting a seed of hope in Emily's heart. She didn't respond right away, letting them sink in as she gazed out the camper's foggy window. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a sky dotted with stars. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly, its call echoing through the stillness. For the next several days, they traveled together, stopping in small towns along the way. Jack took on odd jobs repairing vehicles, earning just enough to keep them moving. Emily helped however she could, cleaning tools, fetching parts, or keeping watch while Jack worked under cars. In return, Jack taught her basic survival skills: how to change a tire, start a fire, and navigate using landmarks. It was during these lessons that Emily discovered a surprising talent for sketching. Using scraps of paper and a pencil she found in the camper, she began drawing scenes from their journey: the winding roads, the towering trees, and the endless skies. One afternoon, as they sat beside a campfire in a secluded clearing, Emily showed Jack one of her sketches. It was a detailed depiction of the camper surrounded by wildflowers, with mountains rising majestically in the background. Jack studied it closely, his eyebrows raising in surprise. "This is really good," he said honestly. "You've got a gift?" Emily blushed, tucking the paper away quickly. "It's nothing special." "It's more than nothing," Jack insisted. "If you ever need a backup plan, art might be it." The idea stuck with Emily long after their conversation ended. She started carrying her pencil and paper everywhere, sketching whenever inspiration struck. Sometimes she drew landscapes. Other times, she captured candid moments of Jack tinkering with the camper or chatting with locals. Each drawing became a piece of her healing process, a way to reclaim control over her narrative. Despite the progress she was making, guilt gnawed at Emily. Jack had given her shelter, protection, and companionship without asking for anything in return. She knew she couldn't repay him directly, not yet, but she resolved to find a way eventually. Until then, she threw herself into helping him, determined to contribute in any way she could. Their bond deepened with each passing day, built on shared laughter, quiet understanding, and mutual respect. Jack found himself opening up more than he had in years, sharing stories about his past, the happy memories as well as the painful ones. Emily listened intently, offering comfort when needed, and reminding him that he wasn't as broken as he believed. And though neither of them spoke about it openly, both felt a growing sense of gratitude for the chance encounter that brought them together, for the strength they found in each other, and for the fragile hope that continued to guide them forward. The days turned into weeks, and Emily began to feel a strange sense of stability she hadn't known in years. Life on the road with Jack wasn't luxurious by any means. The camper was cramped, the meals were simple, and the nights were often cold, but it was safe. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, she felt like she could breathe without fear choking her lungs. Jack's quiet strength became a constant source of reassurance, and his unwavering kindness softened the edges of her guilt. She knew she owed him more than just gratitude. She owed him everything. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire in a secluded clearing, Emily watched the flames dance and flicker. The stars above shimmered brightly, scattered across the vast expanse of the night sky like diamonds, spilled onto velvet. Jack leaned back against a log, sipping coffee from a tin mug, while Emily sketched absent-mindedly in her notebook. Her pencil moved swiftly over the page, capturing the scene before her. The fire casting warm light on their faces, the shadows stretching long behind them, and the endless canopy of stars overhead. "You're getting better," Jack remarked, glancing at her drawing. "That one's going to be a keeper." Emily smiled faintly but didn't respond. Her mind was elsewhere, caught between gratitude and an overwhelming sense of obligation. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was taking advantage of Jack's generosity. He had nothing, no home, no family, no steady income, and yet he gave freely, expecting nothing in return. It wasn't fair. "I need to leave soon," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the peaceful silence like a knife. Jack froze mid-sip, lowering his mug slowly. "Leave? Why?" Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the pencil. "Because I can't keep relying on you. You've done so much for me already, and I don't want to take advantage of your kindness. I need to figure things out on my own." Jack stared at her for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You think I'm doing this because I expect something in return?" "No," Emily replied quickly, shaking her head. "But still, I can't stay forever. I have to find my own way." Jack nodded thoughtfully, gazing into the fire. "I get it," he said after a pause. "You've got dreams, goals, a life waiting for you somewhere. But listen, Emily, you're not a burden, not even close. Helping you has been, well, it's been good for me too. Keeps me grounded, reminds me there's still some good left in this world." His words hit her like a wave, washing away some of the weight she'd been carrying. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging voice in her head telling her that staying longer would only deepen the debt she felt she owed him. "I'll always be grateful," she whispered, looking down at her sketchbook. "But I need to repay you somehow. There has to be a way." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but Emily cut him off with a determined look. "Please, Jack, just let me do this. I need to." He sighed, recognizing the stubbornness in her tone. Arguing wouldn't change. Her mind, it never did. Instead, he simply nodded. "All right. If that's what you want, I won't stop you, but remember, you don't owe me anything." A few days later, they arrived in a bustling city surrounded by towering skyscrapers and neon lights. The contrast between the open highways they'd grown accustomed to and the crowded streets was jarring. Emily insisted this was where she needed to start fresh. Jack reluctantly agreed, parking the camper near a bus station and helping her gather her few belongings. A backpack filled with clothes, her notebook, and a handful of sketches she'd worked on during their journey. Before leaving, Emily handed Jack a small painting she'd created using materials she'd scavenged from thrift stores along the way. It depicted a lone tree standing tall against a stormy backdrop, its branches reaching defiantly toward the heavens. The colors were bold yet muted, conveying both struggle and resilience. "This is for you," she said softly, pressing the painting into his hands. "It reminds me of you. Strong, resilient, unbreakable." Jack stared at the painting, his throat tightening. He wasn't used to receiving gifts, especially ones that carried such meaning. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice gruff with emotion. "I'll treasure it." They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Emily stepped forward and hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Take care of yourself, Jack," she murmured. "And thank you. For everything." Jack returned the hug, patting her gently on the back. "You too, Emily. Don't forget you're stronger than you think." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Jack watched until she was out of sight, then climbed back into the camper, the painting cradled carefully in his arms. As he drove away, he couldn't help but feel a pang of emptiness. Life on the road had been lonely before, but now it felt hollow. Months passed, and Jack tried to settle back into his routine. He fixed cars, traveled from town to town, and occasionally glanced at the painting hanging inside the camper. It reminded him of Emily and the brief but profound connection they'd shared. He wondered how she was doing, whether she'd found her footing in the world. Part of him hoped she'd reached out, but another part understood if she hadn't. Some people needed space to heal, to grow. Then, one day, months later, Jack decided to check the post office box he occasionally used for mail. It was mostly junk, advertisements and bills, but tucked among the envelopes was one addressed to him in neat handwriting. His name and the address were written clearly, and there was no return label. Curious, he tore it open and pulled out a folded letter and a check. The note read, "Dear Jack, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to thank you again for everything you did for me. Because of you, I found the courage to start over. I sold my paintings and got noticed by a gallery owner here in the city. My first exhibit was a success, and this is my way of saying thank you. Please use this to rebuild your life. I owe you everything. With love, Emily." Jack stared at the check, his heart pounding. It was for $50,000, a staggering amount of money, far more than he'd ever imagined holding in his hands. His vision blurred as tears welled up in his eyes. He sank onto the curb outside the post office, clutching the letter and the check like lifelines. For years he'd wandered aimlessly, convinced that life had passed him by. But Emily's gesture proved otherwise. She hadn't just repaid him financially, she'd given him something far greater. Hope. Hope that he could turn his life around, that he mattered, that kindness could ripple outward and create change. Overwhelmed, Jack sat there for a long time, letting the enormity of Emily's gift sink in. When he finally stood, he tucked the letter and check safely into his pocket and made his way back to the camper. Inside, he hung the painting once more, positioning it prominently above the dashboard. To him, it symbolized more than resilience. It represented redemption, connection, and the enduring power of human kindness. As he gazed at the painting, Jack whispered to himself, "Thank you, Emily. You've given me a second chance." The envelope weighed heavily in Jack's pocket as he drove away from the post office, his mind racing with possibilities. $50,000 was more money than he'd seen in years, more than he ever thought he'd have again. It wasn't just the amount that stunned him. It was the gesture itself. Emily had taken something she loved, her art, and used it to repay him in a way that went far beyond financial value. She'd given him hope, purpose, and a chance to rebuild what he'd lost. For days, Jack couldn't stop thinking about what to do next. He parked the camper on the outskirts of a quiet town, surrounded by rolling hills and open fields. Sitting at the small table inside, he spread out the letter and check, reading Emily's words over and over. Each time, they filled him with a mix of gratitude and awe. Rebuild your life, she'd written. But how? Where did he even begin? Jack spent hours sketching plans in a notebook, jotting down ideas and crossing them out just as quickly. He knew one thing for certain. He didn't want to return to the aimless wandering that had defined his existence for so long. This gift wasn't meant to sustain his old life. It was meant to create a new one. Slowly, an idea began to take shape. What if he opened a small auto repair shop? A place where people like him, those who were struggling or overlooked, could find work and support? It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical and it felt right. With renewed determination, Jack set to work. He used part of the money to purchase a modest home, a cozy little house with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but sturdy enough to call his own. Then he leased a nearby garage and stocked it with tools and equipment. The space wasn't fancy, but it was functional, and Jack poured his heart into fixing it up. He painted the walls a bright blue, hung shelves neatly along one side, and installed a sign above the door that read, "Jack's Garage, honest work, fair prices." Word spread quickly about the new mechanic in town. At first, customers were few and far between, but Jack's reputation for quality work and fair dealings soon drew people in. Locals appreciated his honesty and willingness to explain repairs without using confusing jargon. Before long, the garage became a hub of activity, bustling with cars waiting for tune-ups, oil changes, and major repairs. But Jack didn't stop there. Remembering the lessons Emily had taught him about resilience and second chances, he decided to hire workers who needed a fresh start. There was Mike, a recovering addict trying to rebuild his life after rehab; Sarah, a single mother looking to provide for her kids; and Carlos, a teenager who'd dropped out of school but showed a knack for mechanics. Jack trained them patiently, teaching not only technical skills but also the importance of integrity and teamwork. Together, they transformed the garage into something greater than just a business. It became a community. On slow afternoons when the garage wasn't too busy, Jack would sit outside on a folding chair, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. His thoughts often drifted back to Emily. He wondered how she was doing, whether her career as an artist continued to flourish, and if she ever thought about him. Though they exchanged letters occasionally, their correspondence was sparse, each update filled with warmth and mutual pride. Emily wrote about her latest exhibits, her travels, and the joy of seeing her work inspire others. In return, Jack shared stories about the garage, his employees, and the small victories that made his days brighter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jack stood inside the garage, staring at the painting Emily had given him. It hung proudly on the wall, a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. The tree in the painting seemed to reach higher now, its branches stretching toward the heavens as though defying gravity itself. To Jack, it symbolized more than survival. It represented growth, connection, and the enduring power of kindness. He turned off the lights, locked the garage, and walked back to his house, the cool night air brushing against his face. As he climbed the steps to his porch, he paused for a moment, gazing at the stars twinkling above. Somewhere out there, Emily was doing the same, dreaming, creating, living her life fully and fearlessly. And though their paths had diverged, Jack knew they would always be connected by the bond they'd forged. Inside, Jack settled into his favorite armchair, a cup of tea steaming on the side table. He picked up a photo frame containing a picture Emily had sent him, a candid shot of her standing beside one of her paintings at an exhibit. She looked happy, confident, radiant. Smiling softly, Jack placed the frame back on the shelf and leaned back, closing his eyes. In that moment, he realized something profound. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past or undoing mistakes. It was about finding beauty in brokenness, strength in vulnerability, and meaning in the connections we make along the way. Jack hadn't saved Emily. She had saved herself. And in doing so, she had unknowingly saved him too. As sleep claimed him, Jack whispered quietly into the stillness of the room, "Thank you, Emily. You repaid me in ways I'll never deserve." Years passed and Jack's garage thrived. The once dilapidated building became a cornerstone of the community, a place where people gathered not just for car repairs but for advice, camaraderie, and encouragement. Jack's employees grew into skilled mechanics and responsible individuals, many of whom went on to start families, pursue education, or launch their own businesses. Meanwhile, Emily's fame as an artist continued to grow, her work celebrated for its raw emotion and powerful themes of resilience and hope. Though they remained miles apart, their lives intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. Emily's gift had given Jack a second chance, and Jack's kindness had given Emily the courage to chase her dreams. Together, they proved that even in the darkest moments, humanity has the capacity to shine brightly, to lift others up, to heal wounds, and to remind us all that we are never truly alone. And every time Jack looked at the painting hanging in his garage, the lone tree weathering the storm, he was reminded of the girl in the dirty wedding dress who had changed his life forever.